So, fuck. Someone doesn't support Black Lives Matter because they don't think that racial inequality is a thing. They don't think that black people have it worse off than white people. Um, and that's where you have to start. Okay? I feel like a lot of the online discourse that we, like, if that's where you know, we should all be treated the same. Okay, here's, like, so let's look at that issue, okay? Here's the shared value that most people would admit is a shared value, okay? I can't, if anyone doesn't agree with this, they're a Nazi and they're not worth talking to. We should all be treated the same. We should all have the same treatment by other people, regardless of race, religion, or creed. Regardless of any of that, we should be treated the same. A lot of people are going to share that value with you. You know what? And there's a lot of Islamophobic fucking people. Even if you just say race, people who say some pretty racist and support some pretty racist policies, I bet you can get them to admit, if you can have a actual discussion with them, that black people should be treated. Not that if they are or aren't, that they should be treated the same way as white people are. That they should be given the same treatment systemically as everybody else. Okay? If you don't agree to that, you're a fucking racist. And I'd imagine you, like, that's like your hardcore white nationalism slash alt-right slash, I mean, let's be totally clear here, fucking Nazis, who think that white people should be treated better than other races. But I imagine a lot of them even would be willing to say that that's something that should happen. They're deluded as far as what reality is, right? But if you can start there and you have someone who's actually willing to listen to you, okay? What happens next is you can't give them anecdotal evidence, okay? You can't say, here's an example, and I know it's unfortunate, but, like, you can't say, here's an example of a white person, a white cop shooting, like, a black person, an unarmed black kid in the back, okay? That they'll say that's horrible, and that cop should be held accountable, and they won't be. But that doesn't prove that there's systemic racism, right? So where do you go from there? You go to studies. If, God willing, these are people who will, like, you back up your point with evidence and hope that that evidence will be listened to. And that's obviously the next bar that conversation needs to meet, because that's where things break down with a lot of arguments, where someone comes in with a general willingness to whatever, and then suddenly it's like, when they feel like they're losing ground, like when they feel like they're losing the argument, they start to really just, they start rejecting things that the argument becomes a little bit less good faith at that point. Like, someone might come in with the best of intentions, and then, but they think that they're gonna win, that, like, they're right, and that there's no, like, it's, if you can start at the point where this is how we should be treated, but you don't believe that you believe that that's how things are, or even worse, you believe that white people are treated worse than black people, which is absurd. But you can find individual statistics. You can find whatever news report that you find, whatever horrible thing happened, you know, once again, another unarmed black teen gunned down by a cop indiscriminately. You can find all of those sources, and they will be procedurally rejected because they don't prove your argument that there's a systemic problem, just that there's a recurring thing. Because they'll make the argument that the media focuses on these specific cases. They'll make the argument, well, that of course, because the media looks for these things because they have an agenda and yada 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 yada. You don't want to go down that road because then everyone gets angry. Because that argument makes me fucking angry. So, because once again, that's not something that you can really That's not a point that they can really prove, and it's not a point that you can really disprove either. It's not. It is anecdotal evidence, so it's unfortunately flimsy as far as getting them to change their fucking mind about the issue at large. Okay. A lot of these conservatives, some of them can't even do this. I've met people who are just openly just white nationalist pieces of shit who will be like, well, such and such shouldn't have existed while black. But most people, I know a lot of conservatives who will be like, yes, and that was a shame. You have to at least be there. Oh, well. Were you guys playing with each other through the door? That's so cute. You coming in or not? Come on, bud. Animals are very distracting today. So, where you go from there is not statistics. This is important, okay? This is very important. It's not statistics, okay? And it's not anecdotes. And anecdotes are these individual cases where something happened that was horrendous. It is a mountain of anecdotal evidence. But it's not enough for someone who, believes that it's not a general problem. And it's definitely not enough for someone who believes that the media specifically seeks out these kind of cases because it generates clicks. Oh, hey, Shadow. I didn't know you were chilling. Nice to hear from you. Yeah, exactly. I'm glad you're in chat. Thanks, man. Most people yeah, no, that's what I was saying. Everyone thinks that they aren't racist. Besides people who are Nazis. I mean, even Nazis don't think they're racist. They think that they're race realists, or that they're just they're big brain fucking rational. Most Nazis believe some just really absurd shit, and they. No, dude, you're cool. I'm happy to talk to you. But the point what I was talking about basically is the idea that was talking about is the idea that white most people don't think that they're racist. So where you can start with argument wise with them is that you have to start from this place of well, you do believe that people should be treated equally regardless of their race. Okay? And most people will agree to that. And if they don't agree with that, fuck those people. Those people are not worth your time, and fuck them. You can't reason with people until they get to that point, because that's the base core shared value. And if you can't, that's the basest shared value you can have in that discussion. And if you don't have that, that's not a person you can talk to. And once again, fuck that person. They're not worth anyone's time until they get to that point. But proving that it's a systemic issue, proving that actually, yes, black people are treated differently across the board, which they are. It is something that you can demonstrate. But you can't go to statistics Individual statistics won't work, okay? And anecdotes won't work. Anecdotes meaning Breonna Taylor. Anecdotes meaning oh my god, this is already so far away, and I'm very tired, so I apologize that I stopped at Breonna Taylor. George Floyd. The Antoine Rose, we're talking local Pittsburgh. The laundry list of names, like, none of that's enough because it's all individual cases. And yeah, it's maddening because you're like, how do you not see that this is a problem? But, you know, I already believe that it is. And I'm trying to convince someone who has been told over and over and over again, probably for most of their life, that it isn't. Studies. At that point, okay? There was an actual study done. You know, it's important to understand the difference between a study. Hey, don't unplug my mic. You're gonna unplug my mic. Stop it. Shit, little cat. It's important to acknowledge the difference between, like, studies and statistics, okay? So statistics are open to interpretation. They lack context. Here's a statistic. That's a fun one. Nazis haven't caught on to this one because they don't read sociology. I've never heard someone make this, use this as a fact, because they're all feels over facts. They don't actually support their arguments. They're just, you know, they're loud, angry, troll pieces of shit. People in ethnically diverse communities have trouble getting along a lot of times, statistically more often. Okay? That is a lone statistic, okay? Think about all the ways you can interpret that, right? It is a statistic out of context that you can interpret in a variety of ways. That they have trouble functioning as a community, these places that are more ethnically diverse. You can look at that as a raw piece of data and say, oh, well, that proves my point, right? That is something that is open to a couple different kinds of interpretation. Another one, okay? Black people, here we are, 1350. If you know what 1350 is, that's a shorthand for this right-wing 4chan meme that was still very much a thing. Conservative media tries to say this more eloquently, but they do say this a lot. Despite making up 13% of the population, black people commit 50% of all crime. Nazis in particular, love to use this argument. It is a statistic without any context. And it leads you to certain conclusions, okay? But it means absolutely nothing as a lone statistic. It's meaningless. They're still open to interpretation at that point. Okay, so you saying something like that doesn't prove your argument. Either of those two things, okay? Because it's not contextualized by more data. Studies are on a different level, right? Like, the difference between a study and a statistic. There's a study done by the Department of Health and Human Services, I believe. I think it was Health and Human Services. I have to find it. I have to find this fucking study because I watched an entire presentation that was basically just the contents of this study. And it was really, really good. And it basically said, regardless of... there is an achievement gap between black and white people. And it is regardless of any other factors. Okay? This achievement gap exists despite education, despite income, despite any other factors, there is a consistent achievement gap across the board. Okay? And you can say, oh, well, people who are, blacks who are higher educated, you can take a lone statistic out of that once again and try to form a different conclusion than what the study really discovers. If you want to just isolate a lone statistic, you could say, oh, so you're saying that black people, even though when they're more educated, don't function at the same level as white people do. And you see how taking that lone statistic can support a racist argument, right? That it's genetics. But if you look at the whole study, if you look at the entirety of this study, what you're going to find is, oh, it's not just education, it's everything. So that doesn't make sense, right? Because if it was just genetics, then why would it be across the board in things that aren't related to genetics? Why would this exist there? That, this conclusion isn't supported by all of this other evidence that we've all compiled together to make our point. That there is an achievement gap, regardless of other factors, based solely on race. Okay? Genetics, the genetics argument maybe you could use to explain, achievement gaps in someone with higher education not being able to be. There's a couple isolated points where you can have that interpretation and use it to support your argument, but you can't use that argument to say that infant mortality rate is not something that that you can use the genetics argument on. Okay? That's where that falls apart. Okay? So looking at the whole study, it's very difficult to argue against. And this is where you... Hi, baby. Hi, baby. Yes, hi, baby. And this is where it becomes very difficult to argue against. And this is where things turn south a lot of times, okay? This is where a lot of arguments go south, even if someone enters in the best of faith. Because this is the next bar that they have to meet. They have to be willing to acknowledge this. They have to be willing to accept this, okay? Because this is the point where whatever their reasoning is looks pretty fucking weak, okay? And this is where there is a certain cognitive dissonance at work here, where and there's a certain rejection bias at work here, where it depends on how big this belief is to them, that there's a good chance that they're going to try to reject it. And that's a damn shame, and that you might get that far and that will happen. But this is also where you can start to change people's minds. This is also the point where you can show this happens, okay? And it is environmental factors. It is systemic factors. And we can prove that, right? We can prove that these are problems because black people get treated differently, because it exists everywhere, and it exists regardless of... because another argument that gets made a lot is that, a lot of black people are poor, and it's a poor people issue. I've heard lefties make this argument that no, it's just because they're black people have less money, and people are actually, a lot of lefties make this argument because some lefties are class reductionists and like to make everything specifically about class and wealth. But yeah, they're wrong too. Sometimes the argument that people will make, though, is that it's just based on, on class, but that doesn't work because or it's just based on wealth, but that doesn't work because it exists regardless of that. People who have a black person with a master's has less success, success career wise than like a high school diploma. Like a white person with a high school diploma has a better chance of success than a black person with a master's degree, with a graduate degree. Like it's just like across the board, it's a thing. So what it does is it all but proves that this is a systemic issue. And the only way someone could argue against that is to look into the specific study and how it was conducted and start picking at that. And most 99 point whatever percent of people are not going to fucking do that. A lot of them still won't concede anything at this point. And this is the point where you'd run into the most problems. Because some people really just don't like losing arguments and don't have the kind of just aren't able to concede as easily, aren't able to, So this is the second place where you're going to lose a lot of people, where you're going to be like, okay, where someone's going to start saying things that are very irrational and not reasoned. Someone who's been making arguments that are relatively reasonable up to this point, based on their perspective, their wrong perspective, within that framework, are making arguments that are reasonable. We'll get to a point where they start to be really irrational and defensive. And oftentimes it's because they're realizing that you're right, and it upsets them. And rather than come to terms with the fact that, oh my God, I've been racist, they choose to reject that information, okay? And they might even do that in the argument, and then later, like, that might have just been a seed that was planted, and they might react violently to it, and they might come around to your kind of thinking on their own. In fact, I imagine that probably happens most of the time. Because someone can't unknow that, but someone can't be prepared to like suddenly have their entire worldview shift, like, or just be changed like that. I imagine that you're going to lose most people there anyways, unfortunately. But if you really want to change someone's mind, we'll wrap this up because we're past 8 hours. And I said that I'd end around now. I want to start being consistent with that. If you really want to change someone's mind, not if you want to bully someone on the internet, not if you want to, prove someone wrong, if you want to demonstrate your intellectual superiority, if you really... Come here, you little shit. Come on. Up. If you really want to change someone's mind, genuinely, I'm just some person on the internet, okay? Like, so this is worth what it's worth. But if you really want to change someone's mind, that's what you do, in my opinion. And that's not something that you can do online. Well, you can do it like, I could potentially do this here with somebody, because I can talk to them. I can actually converse with someone. I can, they hear my voice. They see my mannerisms. All of the things are communicated besides just words on a page, right? We're communicating very little information to begin with when we talk to people online. You're just getting the text. You're not getting tone. You're not getting inflection. You're not getting most of the things that go into communicating with another human being. You're not getting any visual elements, and expression, posture, like just all of the things that go into communicating with another human being. They're not there. A, and B, it's just not. You don't have like those kind of long form discussions with people in like the comment section on a fucking Facebook article. It just doesn't happen. It very quickly devolves into people just yelling at each other because they're frustrated that they disagree on something. So these are the kind of conversations that you would have with like your friends and family, maybe. That would be the way I suggest doing these things. I certainly didn't invent this. This is just something that I've learned from watching people debate. That I think has like been like an effective strategy as much as there is one. Um, so that's my spiel. I think we're gonna end on that note.